Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Onell Crawford, host of the cannabis-related podcast and an industry consultant, particularly with vapes. Now, before we get started, I've got housekeeping before the housekeeping. When we had this interview earlier this week, we ran into a few technical difficulties. Essentially, we lost all my audio and all my video. It's kind of important on the podcast format. However, our producers were able to salvage our conversation in Zoom. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up that the audio might sound a little different. The video is going to look different because, well, there is none. Actually, wait a minute. We have Onell's video, so you're just not going to see me. And really, you're not here for me. You're here for Onell. It's a great conversation with Onell, and I want to make sure that you hear it. Our producers did everything they can to sweeten the audio, and I think it still sounds really good. Now, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can still help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. And now, my conversation with Onell Crawford, podcast host, and I hope I get to be on his podcast as well. Well, Onell, I always like to start with a bit of background, and I know that you have a rich history in the industry, but how was it that you got your start?
First of all, I'm going to rip off all of that share, like, subscribe stuff because I don't ask for none of that, but I'm going to totally, I'm kidding.
No, you have to. No, do the housekeeping. It's
Let's go. I'm stealing it all. Let's go. Where's my people? All right. So how did I get into the industry? Is that the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I started out as a creative director in the music and entertainment space. I was working with casting directors, creating one sheets. One of the casting directors that I worked with actually created a show called Extreme Home Makeover. So I'd work with them behind the scenes. I was in music mostly. And then through a project, as I was working on with this super producer based out of Vegas, it kind of exposed me to the new world of cannabis as far as I'm concerned. We're going back to 2000, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that range. And California is booming when it comes to cannabis. But here in Canada, I mean, we're still waiting another 5 years before we see federal legalization. So that's what really got me started. And then in 2017, I had an opportunity to work with a tech company here in Toronto, cannabis tech company. And yeah, the rest is history. I just started building relationships in the space, and here I am today.
What was the cannabis tech company that you started working with, and what was your role there?
It was a company that manufactured vape hardware. We had worked with licensed producers, multi-state operators, and single state operators here in North America, and it was all technology that was focused on vaporizers, 510 vaporizers. It was a brand new category in the space. And it was exciting. It was a tech company based out of here in downtown Toronto.
Okay. And that's kind of your consultancy side of the business, right? Is you kind of lend your expertise to the vape side of the cannabis business?
Yeah. Again, going back to California back in, let's say 15, 16, 17, you see there was a lot of cash grab happening. I mean, there still is. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of concerns around the vape. And if you looked at every category, there was a lot more focus on grabbing the money that was floating so quickly versus actually specializing and providing, consultation specific to a category or a product. And, after a few years or after a couple of years of working with this tech company, I recognized that there was a need there, especially with the heavy metals. We had the vape crisis, E-Valley. And there's just a whole bunch of things that was so unknown with a new way to consume cannabis. And I figured, you know what, I'm already in it. I understand the manufacturing. I've consulted with regulatory bodies, large corporations. Let's turn this into a real specialized opportunity for the clients that are effectively providing the experience to the end user. So to me, the end user is the ultimate point of all of this legalization.
Where were you during that vape crisis or vape gate? And did you see it coming? And how did you help, some of the companies kind of see through it? Just because could have been pretty devastating for people that didn't navigate it wisely.
Oh, it was absolutely devastating. More devastating for the consumers at the end of the day, because like I said earlier, there were companies that would just buy it off of sites from overseas and no understanding of the terpenes, for example, and the volatility of it, putting that into metals that don't qualify as food grade or what have you. Definitely an issue. As far as navigating and seeing it coming in 2018, I worked with some medium-sized multi-state operators at the time who, quite frankly, were ahead of the curve. We kind of saw it coming. Cannabis vape hardware is really off of the backs of e-cigarette. There was no, I mean, we're starting to get there. There are companies that are designing technology specific for cannabis, but at the end of the day, this is all e-cigarette products that are modified. And of course, there's going to be natural problems. You're working with e-juice that doesn't have, the acidity of terpenes and all these other compounds that come out of cannabis, but we're still using that same material. So everything has to change. And I mean, it's evolution, right? We're creating a whole new industry, legal industry, and we're creating new products now that it's legal. So there's going to be challenges, and there were some companies that saw it coming. For those that kind of got nervous about it, which, I mean, it happened. There were a lot of companies that were just like, wow, we're just not going to touch this. There's really an education component. When you're buying anything offline and you don't have the ability to consult with anyone to understand, what are the tools, the quality assurances that go into that product, there's always a risk. So working with companies like this tech company or consulting with me, where at least I have that experience, we can help navigate some of these companies away from using poor products, poor materials, et cetera.
What part of your expertise working as a music producer and in the television industry?
I wish I was a music producer. No, I worked with, but I'll take the credit. Yeah, okay. We'll edit this and I'll take the credit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the expertise that you gained in that industry, which of it has translated to your work in cannabis?
Oh, phenomenal question. So, as you know, a lot of companies are trying to differentiate themselves. And especially in Canada, we have regulations that essentially tell you can't do much with marketing. You can't appeal to kids. You can't appeal to young persons. It can't be colorful. It can't be cartoon. Like, there's very, very stringent rules, especially in comparison to America. But a lot of that creative direction, the ability to foresee products, innovations that we should be looking towards to get the industry moving towards specific products for cannabis. I think my creative side has allowed me to impact positive change on the development of products, or the creative side, just, having companies express their brand identity. So I can help them with that. Also consistency in that branding. I had one experience, for example, where I was working with one of the project managers, and they came to me and asked me if I would ask the customer to accept an off color. And I take that extremely seriously, especially coming from a creative world. And I literally asked the question: if this was Coca-Cola as our client, would you dare ask me to ask them if they would be okay with blood orange red versus their classic red? And once you say it in that manner, you have to remember that every company, big or small, deserves that respect of maintaining consistency in their brand identity. So that's definitely translated into this world as well.
It would definitely be a different brand if Coke went blood orange.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I'd be a fan. The ketchup chips, by the way, it went from I don't know what color that red was to a brownie color, and I stopped buying that ketchup chips. It was off brand. I don't know what happened there.
No, it is. It's amazing how just the smallest tweaks can permanently alter a brand.
100%.
How did you become, sort of what some say is the most connected man in cannabis?
Oh, Drew. That's my guy. Yeah. I love Drew. Drew from Boveda. Drew and I have, gone through these circuits. I mean, every time he was there, I was there. I was there, he was there. And this is going back to, 2017, MJ Biz, one of the largest cannabis conferences in the industry. There are so many good conferences. I'd love to talk to you about some of them. But yeah, I mean, we were always at these events, and I'm an outgoing individual. My goal is to do good business with good people. I'm not hungry for every opportunity. And I think Drew kind of appreciated that and saw that. Drew is the man who coined that phrase. And I'm like, man, I got to live up to this. But I think with all seriousness, being the most connected person is really about trying to help people at the end of the day. The more you want to help people and see success in your network is the more you're going to reach out to people. And I think it just evolved that way. It definitely was by design. I saw this industry as a new opportunity where everybody or most people saw the value in relationships very early. And this industry, I mean, especially in Canada, being legal in 2018, we've just invented the wheel. We don't know about rims yet. We don't know about Pirelli tires. We're just rolling this piece of wood that we've, turned into this cylinder that's rolling, and we're excited. And I think there's so much opportunities down the road, especially when you start building relationships from now. So it's always been important to me to connect, and not everything needs to have a dollar value. Sometimes authenticity just needs to start from making connections for the purpose of being connected and doing good things, right? So
is that one of the
I assume that's where it came from.
Well, I mean, is that one of the things that kind of drew you into the cannabis industry as you sort of were exposed to it? Is because to me, having exposure to other industries as well, is that cannabis by and large seems like an industry built on doing good business with good people.
I mean, it started that way.
Yeah.
As we call the legacy or the traditional market, that was definitely where the community was. And when you look at the way the legal industry now, it's a lot of business people doing business. Community is, excommunicata in that world that they live in. It's business. And I understand it from a business perspective. There's an opportunity, let's make some money. But this is not pharma, it's not to alcohol, it's not automotive. This is a product, let's call it a product and an industry that has been impacted by deliberate laws, oppressive laws, hatred, racism. People have lost their lives and been separated from their homes, and people are still suffering from that impact generationally. People still incarcerated. So when you see that this industry is building like it's just a business, I created socks, let's sell socks. No, this one's much more to the heart. I've seen people personally get arrested. I've seen people's family destroyed, all because of smoking a joint or, getting caught up in something where, over enforcement due to the war on drugs has impacted them. So for me, there was definitely a part of growing up that was familiar with, being in this industry. But now that it's legal, there's an opportunity to do right and create that community again with the right people. Not everyone in this industry are good people.
Sure. Well, understand. And I mean, not everyone in any industry are good people.
I agree.
There's always the people that are just chasing out.
Oh
yeah. No, understood. Yeah. But do you think that the industry is doing enough? Just because in terms of, I think that the industry does look at the legacy, and with some of the social equity initiatives, try and do the right thing, where other industries are just like full steam ahead, profitability only, where I do feel, even if it's just kind of blowing smoke, I feel like some people are actually trying when it comes to social equity and undoing some of the wrongs of the past.
Absolutely. There are people that have actually, when you look at the history of their brand, their company, they have been instrumental in some of what we would classify as negative effects during the war on drugs and what have you. But a lot of those companies have turned around through evolving. The people have evolved their policies have evolved. And a lot of them are actually really diverse companies with people that want to do good for the sake of doing good. It's right. This needs to happen. But then there are other people that are using it as a publicity stunt. There are companies out there who leverage the narrative. The war on drugs has impacted people, and it's a medicine, and then they get licensed. And the most that they do is donate money to charities that have nothing to do with those that have been impacted by the war on drugs. I would love to see some of these larger companies that, and don't get me wrong, I know a lot of companies are not yet making money. Like there are so many companies that are still struggling, and I can appreciate that. Everyone's still trying to navigate this changing regulations and landscape. But for the larger ones that do have some cash, especially when you look at the Cannabis Sunshine List and you're seeing, 6 figures in salaries, 6 figures in bonuses, and there's no brick that's been laid in an impacted community, yet you have 4 or 5 retail shops that are selling back to those communities. And what's worse is even within those shops, it doesn't reflect the community that they serve, which is also problematic. I think if you're going to sell in an Italian community, chances are you want to have people who understand that culture, can speak Italian, and it's great for ROI, it's great for business, and it's great for community. But I don't think everyone in the space is doing it. But there are good people in the space that are making that do have commitments to making change.
As we move forward as an industry, what are some of the ways that we can deconstruct the stigma and raise awareness around the plant?
We got to do things like this. We got to have podcasts. We got to have media. We got to have independents that are balancing that media conversation. Right now, we look at some of the larger names. I'm not going to throw any names out here. It's not a negative thing, but we have the usual suspects that are talking to the usual suspects. And we're constantly hearing year-over-year growth. We're hearing about mergers and acquisitions, but we're not hearing that conversation as much as what we've done in certain communities, how we've rebuilt certain communities. Hiring someone from an impacted community and putting them in a laundry room or in a trim room doesn't diversify your company. Let's start getting some people that have been impacted trained. Let's start bringing them into positions of power to make an impact and help grow the ROI, help grow the market share.
Have you seen any companies, or do you have anyone in mind in particular that have done it right in terms of taking people that were impacted in the community, putting them in a place of power, and then, making real change?
And that's a great question. There are definitely companies out there who have diverse staff, have a diverse culture. Can I think of, or would I call out anyone in particular? I don't think I would dare. I don't think off the top of my head I can really call anyone out, but there are people that I know that are diversified, companies that I know that are diversified as far as people go. I think at the point of it all, is there enough is the question, right? Because the impact was a lot. There were a lot of people that have been impacted, and it's not color coded. I grew up in Toronto, and, for every group of 5 people, it's 5 different nationalities, 5 different, they've all been impacted by this plant. So in order to back to your question about destigmatizing, I think we have to start providing conversations that are not focused on smoking weed and getting high, but the benefits of using a topical or, taking CBD for this effect or that effect. I think we just have to expand the conversation around the use so that we can remove the stigma around a particular use, which is smoking.
Well, and I think we've just begun that process in terms of
Agreed,
some of the real R&D that we've seen coming out of academia, finding actual cures for different parts of the plant beyond just sort of the psychedelic effects of it. Just because when I hear about how, half of the cannabinoids in the plant still are undiscovered, I mean, that's some real frontier out there that could serve a lot of good outside of just regular intoxication.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry. Yeah.
The truth is we there is information out there about broader benefits to cannabis. I mean, hemp is something that, in my opinion, is more important. Let me rephrase that, is underappreciated. Mm-hmm. Hemp has the stalk of the plant has so much utility, from ropes to canvas. They used to use it in the sails on ships and boats and what have you. Procter and Gamble has introduced hemp into their toothpaste. So, hemp Henry Ford in 1941 tried to bring out a hemp vehicle. There's plenty of uses for the plant that are not just about ingestion or curing specific ailments. There's many other benefits to the plant. We just got to expand the conversation. It's very focused on THC. THC, if I look at America, for example, THC to me is like Las Vegas. It's loud. Here I am. Look at what I can do. But the other states have a purpose too. And I think the other cannabinoids outside of THC are equally, if not more important than just isolated THC. As a matter of fact, the entourage effect, leveraging all the cannabinoids and terpenes and compounds within the plant, to me is more important than just isolation of THC. Mm-hmm. So it's really about opening up the conversation and sharing the diversity of this plant, the utility of this plant. It's far reaching. There's power. There's fuel. I read something the other day that said if we took, and I haven't qualified it. It was on some type of library online, and it said, if you took 6% of America's available land and planted hemp, you can power the entire nation.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so much about it, especially on the hemp side, especially, hempcrete. Building houses.
I'm all in on hempcrete, man.
Right. There's hempcrete. I want to see more hemp straws. Mm-hmm. Let's get rid of these stupid paper straws. That's like 10% of the plastic cup that they're giving us, and create hemp straws. But we got to drive down that price by, what's that thing called? A decorticator, I think is what it's called.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
It's something that does something with hemp.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. But yeah, like if we start creating more of these machineries and processing hemp in a more sustainable way, we can get a lot more benefits out of it.
Do you think part of that waiting to kind of unlock the true potential of the plant is we need to get to the point where every state, every territory has some form of legalization? Because right now, as we just come online state by state, a new state comes online and it's just potency, right? It's THC potency. But then in some of the other markets like California, Colorado, where you see a more mature market where people become more connoisseurs and they become more investigative when it comes to the plants, do you think that'll open up once it's legal across the U.S. and other territories?
I think everything's going to open up once federal legalization or federal prohibition, comes to an end. I think everything's going to open up. There's going to be plenty of opportunity. I'm not sure how to give you a direct answer to that. But I do think that in the grand scheme of things, there are organizations and institutes that know more about it than the public knows about it. The NIH has been talking about it for a while. It's been a part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia since 1850s. So the University of Mississippi has been doing research since the 60s, I believe. So there's a lot more information on how to use this that's out there. I think just like banking, there are people and companies that are hesitant to continue to explore, to open up that conversation. It's still somewhat, as you mentioned earlier, stigmatized. And I think we got to first do what we're doing by elevating the conversation, expanding it, talking about hemp and topicals and capsules, and moving away from just talking about smoking weed. And I think we'll be able to see a lot more benefits out of this plant.
In your opinion, do you think we've reached the pinnacle of cannabis interest in the United States?
I don't have an opinion. I'm just kidding. Of course I have an opinion. No way. I think there's so much more to go. First I look at this like, if you want to look at this like a mountain, we're climbing the mountain everywhere. 190 plus countries in the world. 2 are essentially federally legal, Canada and Uruguay. The United States is right on the cusp of legalization. I say that hesitantly. The current president and the candidates, I don't know, but there's so much more. There's so much more to discover with this plant. And, once it starts to open up around the world, I think we'll start to see more use and seeing it integrated more and more into our day-to-day lives. I've gone to HomeSense and I've seen candles that are using hemp. Like I said, Procter and Gamble is using toothpaste with hemp. it's a slow crawl, but I think there's a lot more that we can include. Porsche in 2019 introduced their what was it, their GT4 Cayman track car. They removed all their carbon fiber and used hemp and flaxseed. So I mean, even Stellantis Group, they announced a couple of years ago that they hired One World Product to start creating internal and external components that are made out of hemp. So I think, once we destigmatize it and more people understand the value of it, and not just, oh, smoking's bad, or I don't like the smell, and all of the things that's been used in reefer madness. Once that's kind of out of the way, I think we'll start to see a lot more sustainable products being created with the use of this plant.
Do you think it's going to take a generational shift to get away from that reefer madness, dare mentality, just because it was so indoctrinated into our brains that our generation just can't see through it?
I think there's going to be I think there's a bit of that, 100%. I think just like many things, it just needs to phase out as we change laws and ideologies and become more accepting and inclusive. I think it'll phase out over time. But I also see that there are people of the baby boomer generation that are accepting of cannabis. We live in a world right now where, just like your podcast and my podcast and some of these other great people that are providing, good information on it, I think having this type of information is allowing those baby boomers to say, maybe it's not so bad, especially when you have things like topicals for joint pains or other products that are, again, away from just consumption and smoking specifically. So, but yes, I do think over time, unfortunately, just like those that are used to it from when it was illegal, there's going to come a point where every single generation knows cannabis from a legal perspective. And there won't really be as much talk about where it came from in the dark ages, so to speak.
You had mentioned a little bit about this, but in your opinion, what is the role of legacy operators and legacy growers in the industry, especially as we've seen the introduction of big business?
What do I think their role is?
Yeah, the role. I mean, just because it seems like there's this juxtaposition of the way things used to be and the way things are now, but there's this incredible demand for that tribal knowledge of legacy cultivators and growers. So there can't be this kind of complete separation.
Yeah, I 100%. I personally feel that, and I mean, I can't change the past, but with the energy of legalizing cannabis, whether it's state to state or country to country, like a lot of industries, there's this elitism mentality. We don't need anyone. We'll do this ourselves. We'll buy the information. I mean, we see it in the industry where a lot of these companies try to connect with celebrities and it fails.
Yeah.
You can't buy culture. You either come from it or you don't. And again, culture is not a color thing. It has nothing to do with race. It's, did you grow up skipping school, smoking weed? Was it just a normal part of your life? Did you smoke with your friends in a session? And when you're, you could be the best CEO in the world. If you've never had experience with that, you create dumb products that just don't connect, or relationships that, the consumers just see through. So when you talk about legacy individuals, they bring authenticity naturally. They've come up with navigating it. Not only that, they should be respected for keeping essentially that industry alive while fighting the laws, while fighting the law enforcement to a point where it's now, okay, fine, we'll legalize it. Well, if you're going to give them certain credits, like allow them to come in and get licenses, and social equity goes to, legacy and impacted people, you should be bringing them closer to the table to learn from them, the genetics and how to grow, how to create repeatable experiences. And I see that there's this corporate mentality and this legacy mentality, and that it's water and oil a lot of times. But I feel that if they were respected more and brought to the table, they can share a lot of that knowledge and authenticity with these corporations, And honestly, it'll translate into being more connected with the community.
On your consultant side of the business, do you run into problems with authenticity a lot? And how do you help clients navigate that to try and find like a true voice?
Absolutely, I do. And I don't, the luxury of choosing who you work with is I don't necessarily gravitate to people that are inauthentic. I don't necessarily compare. Sorry, it's irrelevant how big you are. As a matter of fact, a lot of times the bigger you are, the thicker the red tape, and a lot of egos that you got to deal with. I'll give you an example. I put together a deal. I won't mention it, and the deal was, let me help you with your vape strategy as you move forward. And the response was, to speak with their head of the laboratory, their lab technician. And, while trying to explain to them what I bring to the table is the ability to understand the materials you should be working with, assessing those, having proper testing, pointing you into the right companies that are doing the right things with the right hardware, et cetera. And he said, nope, I'm staying with this company because it worked with the last batch. That's a problem that affects the consumer at the end of the day, because you're not even open enough to say, I don't know what I don't know. Let me at least listen and understand that the hardware needs to evolve as the formulations and the extracts evolve. Because these lab chemists and these guys that are working on vape formulations, and they're smart people. These guys that are creating repeatable these are smart individuals, but they're in their lane. They're great. And we need to work more collaboratively to have these discussions that can make a positive impact down the road. So I try to avoid, to answer your question, I try to avoid the ones that have too big of an ego and just,
yeah.
I like relationships.
That makes sense. That's just part of the vetting process, right?
Yeah.
Where, you have that initial conversation. You're like, hey, this just isn't going to work.
It's not going to work. Yeah. There's power in no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did you start the cannabis related podcast?
Great question. I started it because, going back to what I said about, the voice that you bring to the industry, the voice that I bring in, is when you look at the information that's readily available, it talks to very seasoned corporate individuals a lot of the time. A lot of the time it's, my background is working with this company. Then they're all Fortune 500 companies. You've gone home with 7 figures easily. And it's a lot of conversation around year over year growth and mergers and acquisitions. And it's just a lot of investor conversations, conversations where anyone who wants to invest in a company or buy, it's all sales pitch kind of ish to me, right? Mm-hmm. It's sugarcoating. I say, well, if your year over year growth is so amazing and your company is doing so well, let's balance out the conversation. Let's start talking to consumers that actually buy your product that don't have shares in your company. Let's start getting real feedback from real people. Let's talk to bud tenders who are dealing with those real people, because consumers and bud tenders are two of the most neglected areas of the cannabis industry. It's a lot of business to business happening in our space, which is needed. It's a new industry, a new legal industry, and we got to, get the business right. But we can't forget the people we're doing this for, which is the consumers. And I don't find any platforms out there that are really talking to the consumers and seeing what their experience is. Plenty of product on the shelf, but where's all the consumer feedback? So, where's the focus groups? I haven't seen one focus group that said, tell me what you loved before it was legal. Well, it's just, go ahead.
Do you think part of that, though, is because a lot of these companies are founded by people that have been in the legacy market? I mean, just because from some of the people that I've spoken with, a lot of times the focus group or the R&D, it's everybody in house where, it's an after hours focus group.
Agreed. So if we have a group of people, let's say 5 people, and all of us like cannabis, we're not going to destigmatize anything because we're all going to agree with each other. So how are we going to all get outside of our own box and our own thoughts if we're not including other people that have other opinions? I find that, even if the company is designed and developed by legacy individuals, I think that's more to the culture, more to what the market may actually want, because they come from it. Whether it's at a street level or, what have you. A lot of these legacy guys have had the authentic experience of good cannabis, good products, and they know what their group of people want. But we're comparing that to people who came from Wall Street, who have never smoked a joint in their life, and they're trying to put out the best cannabis, and it just doesn't work or translate, right? And I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. That's my thoughts on it.
I think that I am constantly amazed when new consumers at any age group finally try the product, find one that works for them, and how it blows their mind. And so there needs to be a better way of introducing products to people that are curious, that isn't just people kind of walking into a dispensary on a whim, or, eating a brownie out of the wrong tray at a family gathering.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're preaching. Yeah. So I think first we got to help people understand that, let's try to help new consumers move away from walking into a dispensary and asking for the highest THC. I think that's a great way to have a horrible experience. I think we need to, again, with podcasts and media outlets that are talking about that are having these conversations, we need to start talking about the entourage effect, the effect of X cannabinoids with X terpenes, and encourage consumers that if they are going to try it for the first time, to start slow. Don't worry about judgment. Don't try to smoke the most in the room. Start with what you're comfortable with and graduate from there. But we gotta, and this is why, again, we gotta respect the bud tenders, because they're the ones that are in there that understand the products. They've tried a lot or most of the products, and they can help consumers say, you don't want the highest THC for what you told me you're looking for. But they got to have those conversations with the bud tenders.
And I think we're making real progress. And I can only say this anecdotally. Yeah. I can only say it anecdotally from the people in my life who have walked up and just said, like, well, what do you mean this person only uses it for anxiety? Because I'm on like these 5 pills for anxiety. Or I have people walk up to me because I have a farming background, and they're like, well, what does it mean to have a hemp crop? And that curiosity, I think, is going to be the bridge to the next phase of the industry. And I do think part of that, you talk about the boomers, they're kind of pushing it a little bit from the top down, just because at the end of the day, they just want to be comfortable and, out of pain. And a lot of that, I've seen a trickle down effect with people in similar situations that are just kind of fed up with traditional pharmaceuticals.
100%. Especially when, the commercials are like, you have a headache, take this pill. Side effects include near-death experiences.
Yeah.
Extreme, harmful bowel movements. Like it's just, the cons far outweigh the pros of a lot of the traditional medicine that we use, when really this plant can alleviate. I mean, a lot of companies know this. You go back into, I forgot what it was, Sears and something back in like the 1800s. They sold cocaine with syringes for $1.50. They would put heroin. It was either heroin or cocaine. I think it was heroin on kids' teeth when they were teething. Cannabis, we know the medicinal value of cannabis. It's when you have companies that it is against their interest and they have influential power, especially coming from, a legacy of powerful people in your life, you can stop these things. Like pharma, for example, can stop cannabis. They have the money, they have the power, they have the ear of the right people. But I think even pharma is understanding that at a molecular level, if they can mimic it, right? Synthetic. Right. I'm not condoning it or against it, but I'm saying people are starting to allow the benefits of cannabis to come forward because people are tired of burying people from opioid overdoses and what have you, right? We're as a society, we're tired of being lied to. We're tired of taking medicine that acts as a Band-Aid, but continues the construction and the digging on the initial problem. I think we're just tired of it. And cannabis provides a solution for many, but cannabis isn't for everyone. And I say that a lot, very proudly too. Just because cannabis is legalizing and it's trendy or it's popular, that doesn't mean it's for you. You may have underlying issues that you actually need to stay away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to bring that topic up also.
No, I think that's a really good point where it's not, I mean, it's sort of the nature of our culture, right? Everybody wants the cure all, but there's no such thing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So ever since you started the podcast, Cannabis Related, you've been on an incredible tear. Do you have any particular episodes that have like stood out as, people that this is the first time hearing about your podcast, you would send them to directly?
Oh, yeah. Who sent you? Someone sent you. Someone sent you these questions. I think the history of the war on drugs is one that is of interest to me because we talk about things very arbitrarily. We a lot of us regurgitate what we've heard. Harry Anslinger, for example, is a name that many, many people hear, and they attribute the Marijuana Tax Act to the prohibition of cannabis in America. And, I thought it was important to, first of all, understand the tone of America. So I started with Nixon and his declaration of the war on drugs, which when you look at it historically from, the industrial prisons to what have you, you can see that from Nixon, the incarceration just did this complete hockey stick, especially when we got into the Reagan era and the 3-strike rule with Clinton. But I think we first need to help people understand the tone of America. For example, social equity is a huge topic, but not many people understand the importance of it outside of, oh yeah, it's impacted. So alcohol's impacted communities. Why don't we have social equity in alcohol? It's so much deeper, and not many people have the understanding. For example, hemp, and this is just a continuation of the war on drugs. Hemp was, King James I in the colony of Virginia declared it law to grow hemp, 100 plants from every landowner. Landowners aren't cultivating 100 plants of hemp. We know who's cultivating 100 plants of hemp. And today, to be locked out of that industry, knowing what it's done to specific groups over these centuries, over these decades and what have you, it's something that we need to understand. Started from a mentality of law. You have the Cooley Act, the Indian Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act. You have all these racist laws in America, but all of that trickles into the tone of America, trickles into prohibition. Harry Anslinger came into it while prohibition had already started. San Francisco with their opium den ban, right? I think it was in 1875, somewhere around there. So first, let's understand the tone of America at the time when prohibition was happening. The tone of America is very different today. There are a lot of Americans that want to see right, but there's a lot of anger. Mm-hmm. It's a lot to get over, but we have to start with education. So understanding the war on drugs is one of the first ones I would point people to. And then, the importance of bud tenders and having good culture in the workforce. I don't think, I think there are some toxic workforces, unfortunately, in the space, but just having these real conversations, because when me floating around the industry and I talk to real people, a lot of people are not happy. They're not treated fairly in the space. And again, this has nothing to do with color. And we saw the exodus during the COVID crisis. We saw a whole bunch of people just completely exiting the cannabis industry. And a lot of it had to do with the treatment. People were being fired arbitrarily and what have you. So yeah, I point to the war on drugs just to get people started on the podcast. But great question. Great question.
Do you
Someone's trying to get me.
with with sort of the mistreated workers that are kind of falling out of favor with the industry, are you pro-union then with some of these bud tenders and operations dispensaries that have been unionizing with the Teamsters, or is that what's your take on that?
Oh, I don't know. And unfortunately, that there's like everything, right? Without proper management, good things can go bad and bad things can end up going well. I think it really depends. Do I think there needs to be some governance? Yes, I think people are not getting what they truly deserve in the space in general. Like I said, there are some companies out there that, and these are real conversations that I had with people. These people will, I say die loosely, but they're down for their company. Their company is there's a hardware company I was just talking to. I won't mention their name, but they just told me the other day, they're like, we don't even do job descriptions. We hire good people for gaps in our business. And it's a very diverse business. You look at their portfolio of employees, and I think I like that. But some companies, they don't treat you well, and they almost deserve to have unionization to keep things up and hold people accountable and protect the employees, quite frankly. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm split down the middle. It really depends on how it's implemented, I think.
Okay. It is a unique industry in that the people that work in it want to work in it, are passionate about it. And it's frustrating to see people like that get disenfranchised and leave the industry.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible. If you go on LinkedIn and you look at I know good people, but if you look at some people on LinkedIn, you look at their history and it's like 6 months at this company, 8 months at this company, a year at this company. And historically, an employer would look at that and be like, oh, that's a job hopper, and that's not fair, because a lot of these employers, again, many companies have entered to exit. They don't care about growing a staff. They don't care about creating a good company and corporate culture. They're just in it to get their investors their money, take their money and merger and acquisition, and I'm out the game. But I think there are many, many, many people and bartenders included, managers included, we put forth great qualities and skills and push this industry forward. But I don't think, I think there's room for improvement at the end of the day.
Okay. And I know we're running long here, but I just said, I wanted to ask you,
take your time.
I wanted to ask you, so right now it seems like we're kind of going through a dark time in cannabis in terms of economically, but do you see any bright spots?
Wow. Do I see any bright spots? I mean, international markets are going to come online sooner than later. I think there's so much saturation here in North America between the legal states, and it's funny, it's not even federally legal, but states like California and Colorado, like they're dying. There's, especially with the excise taxes and all these taxes in Cali, for example. I unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, because there's so many variables. I do know that sooner than later, this industry is going to, as it stands now, needs to consolidate. And I think that's going to happen at a much more exponential rate than it's been happening. I mean, you go back to COVID. I don't remember which country stat, if this was Canada or America. I think it was America, but it went from, in 2018, 200 and something mergers and acquisitions, 19, 100 and something. And then in 2020, at the beginning of COVID, by the end of 2020, we were at 140. So the mergers and acquisitions are happening. Companies are still being acquired. Consolidation is happening. These British American, sorry, I shouldn't call out anyone, but British American Tobacco and a lot of these large cigarette and alcohol companies, they're here. They're watching, and they're doing what they've done well in their own industry, which is take their time and put support where they need support to further this industry. But they're going to come in eventually. They got the money, the long money, the strong money, the old money to come in and help consolidate this. And I think, unfortunately, things will regulate a little better when there's not so much noise. There are companies in California, again, I won't mention any names, that it's the whole company is just a complete hypocrisy, and they need to go. They need to go. And I know there's energies out there that are pushing them out, because the word on the street is communities are tired of these corporations that are selling into their communities and not even having any kind of positive community engagement with those people. So I hope, my hope would be the consumer would find out who the craft grower is, who the authentic grower is behind brands, and support the craft, the micro, the smaller guys. I'm not saying don't support the bigger guys, but if they're inauthentic and they're just in it to sell cannabis, like they're selling t-shirts and socks, this isn't the right business for that. This is a community driven type of product.
You had mentioned trade shows earlier. Do you plan on going to MJ Biz this year?
MJ Biz. Ooh, I haven't been to MJ Biz since 2019. I'd love to go. Obviously, COVID discontinued my traveling at that time. I don't know. Is it in Vegas this year again? I would imagine.
Yeah.
Is it in December?
Vegas
or
in
November?
like late November and maybe a couple days in December. Yeah.
I would like to go. It's definitely a great place to meet and connect with new brands that are kind of getting started and old friends and old faces. But Hall of Flowers is one of my favorite. Comparatively, I look at MJ. I mean, MJ Biz is a great representative of Vegas itself, right? It's glitz and glams. There's all kinds of the most expensive and extravagant flashing lights to come into my booth. But Hall of Flowers kind of stripped all that away. And they're just kind of like, look, sell your product and, do your best to sell the product. We don't need, 20 by 20 booths set up just to attract someone to buy a product. But MJ Unpacked is a good one. I like those guys. They're, focused on investors and helping to grow the industry. But back to your question, I'm hoping on it. We're at a maybe right now. I'm hoping on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if that maybe turns to a yes, it'd be great to see it on there.
Likewise. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to turn that to a yes. Traveling is good. I'm good to travel now. The restrictions aren't the same. And I don't know, maybe we'll plan on it.
Excellent.
We'll get the entire Title League team out there and we'll make a day of it.
Well, I know that I've taken a lot of your time today and I really do appreciate your expertise on the industry. But before we get out of here, is there anything else that you'd like to share or anything in particular you'd like the Cannabis Equipment News audience to know about yourself or cannabis related?
I was actually I was going to flip this around and ask a little bit about you and let's tell a little bit about what you got. But I know what you're doing. I'm your guest and I appreciate it. We got to get you on my show so I can pepper you with all these questions and see what you got going on. Because like I said, what I've heard and what I've seen, you guys have a great platform here. You're talking to the right people. Entex Equipment, we learned about them and a lot of clients that I talk to, especially in the international markets, they love that equipment. People there are great. And this is how I got to learn about you. So, I'm grateful and I want to learn more about you also. I don't know. I think if you're looking to have conversations that are authentic and you want to participate, I have no problem bringing the average consumer on the podcast to talk about their life experience. Feel free to check us out on Cannabis Related. We're on all major streaming platforms, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Deezer, you name it. And, I think the one thing that I want to tell people is let's be responsible and be respectful as we're growing the cannabis industry. For example, we've argued that we've been oppressed. We're not allowed to express ourselves with the plant. And now that we're moving into a world that's legal, let's respect those people who still don't want to smell cannabis or be, clouded by, a group of people that are just smoking irresponsibly around other people. Let's just be respectful of others in our spaces. And, if you are a first time user or you're kind of curious, as we say, you want to start slow, have people around you that you trust, that you can depend on if you start feeling away or what have you. But always, always, always start slow. You're not trying to impress anyone. Start slow, start with products. And I do recommend full spectrum products just because it's a better experience than, isolated THC in my perspective. But that's it. Come check us out. Cannabis Related. Yeah.
I agree with you there on both full and whole spectrum products. And I think that if everyone could just be a little bit more responsible and respectful, the culture could go a long way pretty fast.
Yeah, I agree. And we have to start. We have to finally. I mean, we're in 2023. The old way wasn't working, right? We got to be respectful to each other. We got to treat people good. Color is in a book. Like, let's start treating people. Let's start treating people well, right? Let's work together as a community. Let's build the cannabis community. Let's educate people, and let's just do right. The fighting. We gotta move beyond that, man. It's time.
I would love to be on your podcast. I look forward
go.
I look forward to the tables turning.
Let's go. All right.
But thank you again, Onell, for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
100%. I appreciate you. Thanks for bringing me on, David. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Onell Crawford, host of the cannabis-related podcast, which I highly encourage you subscribe to right now, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Let's go.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.